They say the night hides what daylight fears. Shadows live, secrets breathe, and beneath every wolf's howl lies a buried betrayal. In this world, the Alpha Prince reigns with an iron fang, flanked by his beta, their cruelty hushed behind closed doors. They mock the powerless, crush the weak, and bend the pack to their whim. Then there's her, an Omega with no name, no past, no voice. She wanders on the margin, an outcast among beasts. To them she's nothing, invisible, forgotten. Yet when the moon bleeds silver and her eyes flare with a light no primal law should ever allow, the walls of lies begin to crack. This is not a tale of destined love. This is a reckoning, because sometimes the shadows don't just obey, they devour. The courtyard stones held the day's heat even after sunset, warm through torn leather and bare knees. The Omega learned that first, the way pain could feel ordinary when enough eyes watched it happen. Torches ringed the packed dirt. Smoke drifted low. Wolves in human skin stood shoulder to shoulder, their laughter quick and mean, their faces eager for sport. She knelt at the center, hands behind her head, wrists aching from a rope that wasn't there anymore but still pressed like memory. The Alpha Prince took his time. He always did. He walked the circle like a judge measuring a sentence, boots slow and sure, cloak dragging lines through dust that erased her footprints. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. Silence fell when he wanted it, like a grip closing around a throat. The beta paced half a step behind him, all sharp eyes and sharp smile, the loyal echo that caught thrown bones before they hit the ground and made a show of crushing them. "Look up," the prince said. She kept her gaze on the earth. It was safer there, among the ash and grit and crushed herbs from the morning's market. Safer to watch ants carry crumbs than meet eyes that had never softened for anyone like her. "Look up," he repeated, softer. And something in the way the crowd leaned forward told her that disobedience would cost more tonight. She lifted her head. The prince was young in the way mountains are young, carved hard by weather and weight, edges that promised no mercy. A thin scar cut through his eyebrow in a clean line, the only imperfection on a face made to be obeyed. He could have been handsome if he were not what he was. Power, on him, was a second skin. He studied her like a map he had already burned. "What do we call you?" he asked. "The pack should have a name for what it tramples." A few laughs cracked the quiet. The beta's was the loudest, a sharp bark that made other mouths open. He was all restless motion at the prince's side, arms crossed, thumb tapping his bicep, eyes never still. Where the prince was ice, the beta was friction. Where the prince cut with silence, the beta cut with words. "She doesn't have a name," someone called from the ring. "Found her at the south carts begging for scraps." "Not begging," a woman muttered near the back. "Working. She carries crates when the merchant's sons pretend their hands are too clean." "Working?" The beta turned his head, smile widening. "We should all thank her for the service then." He took 2 steps forward and crouched in front of the Omega, like a friend about to share a secret. He wasn't her friend. His eyes were the bright, amused eyes of a fox that had already found the chicken coop. "Show us what those hands can do," he said, catching her wrist and lifting her palm. The skin there was rough with calluses, a map of small cuts that had tried and failed to heal. He tutted. "No wonder you keep them down." The prince didn't touch her. He didn't need that either. He watched, arms loose at his sides, a predator who never rushed because hunger, for him, was a choice, not a need. "Stand," he said. She pushed up from her knees. Her legs shook. The crowd liked that. It made them feel safe. A weak thing was an easy mirror. "How does a nameless Omega find herself inside these walls?" the prince asked. "I came for water," she said. It came out hoarse. She hadn't used her voice much today. The market did not need words from girls it did not see. "Water?" The beta made a circle with his hand toward the dark stone well at the far end, its rope coiled neat, its bucket dented from years of use. You heard her. We're all saved. A few more laughs. One loud voice, drunk maybe, offered to carry her back to the well if she'd wag her tail. She kept her eyes on the prince. Fear made her breathing shallow, but something underneath it stayed steady. She didn't know what to call that part of herself. It had no name either. You don't drink from our well, someone snarled. It isn't yours, she said without thinking. The words jumped out, surprised her too. A hush ran around the ring. The beta's brows lifted, delighted. Oh, listen, he said. She bites. The prince's mouth barely moved. Is that what you think you are? I think I am thirsty. That earned her a shift in his eyes. Not anger, interest, brief as a spark. He stepped closer. She could smell iron and pine and the faint oil used to keep leather from cracking. Thirst is simple, he said. You ask, you kneel, you wait. I did kneel, she said, and heard the edge in it too late. The beta's hand snapped out, quick as a snake, catching her chin between fingers and thumb, turning her face side to side like he was checking a horse's teeth. She flinched, but only once. The crowd leaned in as one. The air felt heavy, as if the night itself was listening. Pretty eyes, the beta said. Wrong color for this dirt. The prince shifted, only a fraction. His gaze held hers now, still as winter. For a second, the smallest, strangest second, she felt heat grow in her chest and press upward, something tight and bright pushing toward her eyes. Not tears, not that. She had learned to swallow those long ago. This was something else. A pressure, a flare, a flicker, like a coal under ash touched by a breath. The prince's jaw worked once. He looked away first. We have rules, he said. They keep order. They keep you alive when the wild wants to chew your bones. Your rules keep you comfortable, she said, before common sense could drag the words back down her throat. Not alive? The crowd hissed. The beta let go of her chin and laughed, that sharp bark again, but there was a tiny question in it now. A tremor only someone close would hear. The prince's hands curled and uncurled at his sides, not quite fists. He studied her like a puzzle piece turned the wrong way that still somehow fit. At the edge of the circle, on a carved seat that had held generations of rulers, the king watched. He had not moved since the Omega was dragged in. He was a broad man gone heavy with time, face cut into weary lines that power could not smooth. A ring of iron sat on his finger. His hand rested on the arm of the chair, as if the wood needed to feel his weight to remember where it belonged. In the torchlight, his eyes were dark and difficult to read, but when the Omega spoke, when her eyes flashed that quick, strange light, something passed across his face like a cloud over the moon. Not anger, not pity. Something closer to recognition and dread. The prince caught that flicker. He didn't look at the king, but the sight tugged a wire inside him all the same. He'd grown up under those eyes, learned what each shuttered glance meant. This one he could not name. Bend, he said to the Omega. Apologize to your betters. Then you'll drink. She stayed standing. The beta sighed, dramatic, and spread his hands to the crowd. You see? She chooses thirst. I choose dignity, she said. It's the same as thirst when your mouth is bleeding, the beta said lightly, and then, too lightly, he shoved her shoulder. She stumbled but didn't fall. Someone in the ring flinched, as if they'd seen a blow coming for themselves. The prince's head tilted. His eyes had gone even colder, but his voice had warmed by a degree. What would you apologize for? He asked, curious now. He looked like a hunter who had noticed an animal refusing to run. For walking where I'm not wanted, she said. For wanting what you think is yours. For using my voice where you prefer the sound of your own. The beta's amusement sharpened, and still she speaks. Let her, the prince said without turning his head. The beta's smile held. He obeyed. Wind rolled in from the open gate, carrying the smell of wet leaves and distant rain. Somewhere outside the walls, a single, long howl pulled thin across the fields. The pack inside the courtyard answered with nothing but stillness, the human silence that belongs to wolves who know they are being watched. "What do you think you are?" the prince asked again, softer now, genuinely asking. He'd asked that question many times to many people. Most gave him the answer he liked. "Nothing without you." She was not most. "Hungry," she said. "Tired." She held his gaze. Her voice steadied. "Alive." Something in the crowd shifted. The small, dangerous shift of people hearing a word they recognized but had not dared to use. The beta felt it, spit in the dirt, and turned that sharp grin toward the nearest knot of onlookers until they looked away. The prince didn't try to command the quiet. He let it stretch and thin until it hummed like a wire. "You think life is yours to claim," he said, a hint of surprise threading through the flatness. "I think you don't get to decide," she answered. For a heartbeat, there was no courtyard, no torches, no pack. Just the space between two people who had never been allowed to be just people. The prince's eyes cut to the left, barely, toward the long shadow of the corridor that led to the ancestral hall. Portraits hung there, faces of the dead looking down on everything the living did. He had spent a childhood walking that hall, memorizing the angles of jaw and eye he should grow into. The queen's portrait had hung at the end, bathed in pale light that made the paint near her pupils catch and hold it. He had always thought the artist had lied. No one's eyes could hold a glow like that. Now, under torchlight and the smell of ash, he saw a flicker of that same impossible light in the Omega's gaze. The beta saw only the crowd. He stepped forward again, eager to push this to a place that would remind everyone who gave orders. He reached for the Omega's shoulder as if to spin her, make her kneel, make the night end the way nights like this always did. A hand caught his wrist, an old hand, bones and sinew, thin skin mapped with age. The healer. No one had noticed her move. She had been a shadow near the well, quiet as weeds. Now she stood between the beta and the girl, small and unbroken, a cloth bag slung across her body, the smell of mint and smoke and bitter root rising from it. "Careful," the beta said, humor drying in his mouth. "You'll break." "I broke a long time ago," the healer said, and her voice was not loud, but it traveled as if the night carried it. She turned to the Omega, ignoring the way the beta's fingers tensed to throw her aside. Her hands hovered near the girl's face, not touching, as if heat would jump skin to skin and tell her the truth her eyes already suspected. The crowd muttered. The prince's head tilted again, almost imperceptible. He did not stop the healer. The king did not move at all. His knuckles had gone white on the arm of his chair. The healer leaned close. Her eyes were cataract pale around the pupil, but steady. The torches cracked. Somewhere a fox yipped and went quiet. The healer's lips barely moved. She whispered, and in the hush, her words reached every ear the way a single drop rings the surface of a still well. "You have the queen's eyes." The courtyard froze. The healer's words carried too far, too clear, sinking into every ear. The queen's eyes. For a heartbeat, no one dared breathe. Then laughter broke. Loud, harsh, too quick. The beta's laugh. He threw his head back, the sound sharp enough to cut through the tension. "The queen's eyes?" he mocked, his lips curling into a fox-like grin. "That relic can't even see her own feet, let alone the eyes of the dead." The crowd exhaled in relief, following his lead, their chuckles ringing hollow against the stone walls. But the prince did not laugh. He hadn't moved since the words fell. His gaze stayed fixed on the Omega, who still stood in the circle, wrists raw, chin lifted, eyes bright with something she didn't understand. The beta nudged him with a shoulder. "You hear her? The old woman's gone senile. Say the word, I'll toss her back into the dirt with her weeds and dried roots." Still, the prince said nothing, because he had seen it. Not a trick of the torches, not the gleam of defiance, a glint deeper, older, a golden shimmer, faint but undeniable, burning behind the Omega's pupils. He had seen it before, not in flesh but in paint. As a boy, he'd wandered the ancestral hall when others slept, staring up at portraits of those who ruled before him. At the far end, under dust and silence, hung a single painting of the queen, his mother. Her face was pale as dawn, her gaze painted with an artist's care that seemed almost alive. It was the eyes that haunted him, the faint suggestion of gold that clung to her irises, a shimmer that should not have been possible on canvas. He had convinced himself it was a lie, a trick of pigment. Yet tonight, in the Omega's stare, he saw the same impossible glint. The Beta, impatient with his silence, stepped closer to the Omega, circling her like a hound. Look at her. Ragged hair, dirt on her skin. Not a drop of noble blood in her veins. You'd insult the queen by putting this stray in her shadow. The Omega held her breath, but her eyes didn't drop. For the first time, the Beta faltered beneath a stare that did not break. The prince finally spoke, his voice cold. Enough. The Beta blinked. He gave a sharp laugh to cover his confusion. Enough? She's just a scrap, nothing more. The prince turned, his words for the Beta alone. Nothing does not glow. The Beta froze. His smirk faltered, but only for a second. He masked it quickly, bowing his head in false obedience. As you say. The crowd began to scatter, whispering uneasily. The healer melted back into the shadows, but her words clung to the air like smoke. The Omega felt their weight press against her chest. She didn't know what they meant, but she knew something had shifted. The pack would never look at her the same again. As the courtyard emptied, the king stood. Slowly. His hand gripped the carved arm of his throne until his knuckles whitened. He said nothing as he turned, cloak dragging, and disappeared into the shadowed hall. But his eyes, those brief, burning eyes, had been fixed on her, and they held no anger. Only fear. The prince watched him go, unease coiling in his gut. His father had never looked at anyone that way. The Omega was dragged from the circle, half shoved, half pulled, her body aching from ropes and ridicule. As she stumbled toward the servants' quarters, her eyes caught the prince's once more. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed. She didn't bow, she didn't flinch, and that glint, the one he'd only seen in paint and memory, burned brighter. The Beta sneered, leaning close to his prince as the crowd dispersed. You'll let this stand? A nameless stray compared to your bloodline? The prince's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. He glanced at the empty throne where his father had sat, then back to the Omega's fading silhouette in the torchlight. Finally, he spoke, voice low and measured. Watch her. The Beta frowned. For what? The prince's eyes were still locked on the shadows where she'd vanished. For everything. The Beta laughed again, uneasy this time, but bowed his head. As you command. The torches hissed in the night air, their smoke twisting upward like secrets carried into the dark. And in the quiet of the ancestral hall, beyond heavy doors, the king stood before the queen's portrait. Her painted eyes glimmered in the candlelight, almost alive. His lips pressed to a whisper no one could hear. Not again. The past cannot return. The night stretched long after the courtyard emptied, the air thick with the remnants of smoke and whispers. The Omega lay on her pallet in the servants' quarters, her body sore from the bruises of mockery but her mind restless. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the weight of the healer's words press into her chest like a stone she couldn't spit out. The queen's eyes. What could that possibly mean? She drifted into uneasy sleep. The dream came harsh, vivid, as if dragged from somewhere deeper than memory. The scene around her was blurred by shadows, yet the sounds were unmistakable. Labored breathing, the wet, terrible cry of a woman in pain. The Omega stood at the foot of a great bed, though she couldn't feel her legs beneath her. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, only watch. The woman was pale, drenched in sweat, hair plastered to her face, her fingers clenching sheets that were soaked crimson. Midwives hurried, voices tight with panic, but all their efforts fell into the air like stones into a bottomless well. The woman's eyes, those golden glinting eyes, locked on something beyond the room. She gasped, half a sob, half a plea, and whispered a name. The Omega strained to hear it, the syllables tangled, strange on her tongue. Elira. Then came the cry of a newborn, sharp and piercing, shaking the dream into clarity. But as soon as that fragile sound filled the room, the woman's body went still. Her hand slipped lifeless across the sheets. The midwives wept. Someone covered her face, and the room filled with the suffocating weight of grief. The Omega jerked awake, breath ragged, heart hammering against her ribs. She sat up in the darkness, sweat sticking her hair to her face. Her palms ached. She lifted them and froze. Thin, angry scratches ran across the skin as if claws had raked her in her sleep. The marks burned, red and raw, though no one had touched her. She pressed them to her chest, but the sting didn't fade. Her whole body trembled. It wasn't a dream. It was something else. Something reaching for her from a place she couldn't name. Across the fortress, the prince did not sleep either. He walked the ancestral hall in silence, torch in hand, his boots echoing faintly against stone. He stopped at the portrait at the far end, the queen, his mother. He had always found her painted gaze unsettling, the golden shimmer in her eyes unnatural, uncanny. Tonight he stared longer, the Omega's defiance replaying in his mind. That same glint had burned in her gaze. He touched the canvas lightly, fingertips tracing the air just short of the painted pupils. "What are you?" he whispered. But the portrait had no answers. The beta found him there. "Still thinking about the stray?" he asked with a crooked smile, though his tone carried unease he couldn't mask. "You give her too much weight." The prince's eyes never left the painting. "You don't give her enough." The beta snorted, but it came hollow. "She's no one." The prince's jaw tightened. "No one doesn't leave my father silent." The beta fell quiet, following his prince's gaze. For the first time, he wondered if the healer's words weren't just rambling after all. Far above, in the king's private chamber, a messenger entered through the narrow doors, bowing low as he extended a sealed scroll. The wax bore the mark of the Elder Council, the circle of wolves older than the king himself, whose voices carried like thunder through generations. The king broke the seal with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the words once, twice, and a chill settled over his skin. The message was brief, but it struck harder than any blade. The forgotten blood stirs. The king closed his fist around the parchment until it crumpled. His lips pressed thin, his breath shallow. He had buried this once. He had silenced the truth with death, lies, and shadows. But blood, it seemed, had no master. He looked back toward the ancestral hall, where his son wandered, where the portraits hung. And though the room was empty, he muttered, low and bitter, "Not her. Not now. I will not let it rise again." Morning did not come gently. The courtyard filled again, not with celebration or duty, but with curiosity. Word of the healer's whisper had spread like fire in dry grass. Whispers carried faster than truth, and by dawn, every mouth in the fortress had something to say about the nameless Omega with the queen's eyes. Some laughed at the notion, others spat in disgust, but all of them came to see. The prince knew this. He had called them. He stood in the circle once more, cloak heavy across his shoulders, boots planted firm in the dirt. His gaze swept the crowd and then landed on the Omega being dragged forward by two guards. Her wrists were bound again, though she made no sound, no protest. She walked like a shadow among torches, her head bowed until she was forced to kneel. The beta stood at his prince's side, smirking. She looked smaller in daylight. easier to break. The prince did not answer. His jaw flexed as he stared down at her. She looked frail enough, yes, but something about her silence grated. Not submission, not fear, something else. He hated that he couldn't name it. "Stand," he ordered. She did, slowly. Her knees cracked as she rose, the crowd leaning forward, hungry for another show. "Last night," the prince said, his voice low but carrying, "you spoke out of turn. You insulted your betters. You defied order." He circled her once, his cloak whispering against the dirt. "Tell me, was it courage or was it ignorance?" The Omega lifted her chin. Her voice came soft, but it carried across the silence. "It was thirst." Murmurs rippled. The Beta chuckled. "There it is, the stray with her clever tongue." The prince stopped in front of her, close enough that his shadow swallowed hers. He leaned down slightly, his words for her ears alone. "You think cleverness will keep you alive?" Her lips trembled, but her gaze did not fall. "I think silence kills faster." For a moment, too brief, too dangerous, the prince almost admired her. Almost. He straightened, his face hardening. Admiration was weakness. He would remind her, and everyone, where weakness led. "On your knees," he commanded. The Omega did not move. The crowd shifted uneasily. Defiance was dangerous, but defiance under his direct command, that was unthinkable. "I said, kneel." His voice sharpened, cutting through the air. She lifted her chin higher. "No." Gasps rippled through the pack. The Beta barked a laugh, stepping forward eagerly. "Shall I help her remember her place?" But before he could move, the Omega's eyes caught the sun. Or perhaps it wasn't the sun at all. For an instant unmistakable, a golden shimmer burned in her irises. It wasn't bright, but it was there, alive, pulsing, undeniable. The crowd froze. No laughter now, only silence, heavy and choking. The prince's breath hitched. The glow was not a trick of light. It was the same shimmer he had seen every night in the painted gaze of his mother. The same shimmer he had dismissed as pigment, as artistry. Yet here it was, alive in the eyes of a girl born of dirt and shadow. The Beta frowned, his bravado cracking. "Did you see?" he began, but stopped when the crowd muttered again, uncertain and afraid. The Omega's chest rose and fell quickly, her fists clenched at her sides. She hadn't felt it, didn't know what had happened, but she knew the air had changed. They were all staring at her differently. She wanted to speak, but the words stuck like thorns in her throat. The prince's eyes narrowed. For the first time in years, his cruelty faltered. He could break bones, silence voices, command obedience, but he could not silence what he had just seen. He turned sharply, his cloak cutting through the dust, hiding the unease clawing at his gut. The crowd whispered. The Beta tried to laugh it off, but the prince did not hear them. Because in his mind, the portrait of the queen glared down on him once more, golden eyes alive with that same glimmer. And now, no matter how hard he tried, he could not shake the truth clawing at the edges of his certainty. This girl, this nothing of an Omega, was tied to him. The fortress did not forget what it saw. By the next day, whispers ran down every corridor like water through cracked stone. Her eyes glowed. The queen's eyes live again. She defied him and still breathes. The words were hushed, but they spread, and with each telling, the Omega's shadow seemed to grow longer. The Beta heard them all. He laughed with the crowd when expected, mocked the gossip when convenient, but the laughter no longer rang true. His mind kept circling back to the courtyard, to that flicker of gold in her gaze. He had followed the prince into battle, into blood, into cruelty itself. He had never questioned. Yet now, a question had sunk its teeth into him and would not let go. That evening, he found her. The Omega was outside the walls, where the ground sloped down to the training pits. She carried a bucket of water, her shoulders bent under the weight, her wrists still raw from ropes. When she set it down, she did not rest. She lifted a broken spear, its shaft cracked and its tip dulled with rust. Her stance was awkward, her swing clumsy, but she repeated the motion again and again, sweat stinging her eyes. "You'll split your skull before you split the air with that," the beta said, stepping from the shadows. The spear nearly slipped from her hands. She spun, chest heaving. "What do you want?" His grin was crooked, but not cruel. "Not tonight." "To watch you fail. Or surprise me." She scowled, gripping the spear tighter. "You've had your fun already." "Fun?" He tilted his head. "That word doesn't cover what happened in the courtyard. You should be dead. Yet here you are, glowing like a firefly when you should have burned out." She flinched, eyes narrowing. "I don't know what you saw." "Oh, I saw it." His grin faltered. For the first time, his voice dropped its mocking edge. "And so did he. That's why you're not Ash yet. He doesn't know what you are. Neither do I." The Omega turned away, but he caught the tremor in her hands as she lifted the spear again. She swung clumsily, her breath ragged. He stepped closer, plucked the weapon from her grasp with ease and turned it in his hands. "You fight like a child," he said. Then softer. "But even a child can learn." She frowned, suspicious. "Why would you help me?" He twirled the spear, offering it back. "Because questions bother me. And right now you are the loudest question I've ever seen." Her hand hovered before she took the spear again. Slowly, she nodded. And so he stayed. He adjusted her stance, corrected the angle of her grip, forced her shoulders straight. His tone stayed sharp but not cruel. With every correction, her movements grew less clumsy, her footing more certain. For the first time, someone wasn't beating her down to mock her. He was shaping her even if he wouldn't admit it aloud. As they paused, sweat glistening on her brow, she looked at him carefully. "You want to know what I dream of?" He arched a brow. "Dreams don't interest me." "They should," she whispered. And she told him, halting at first, then with words spilling too quickly. Of the woman writhing in childbirth, of the name whispered in the dark, of the golden-eyed gaze that haunted her sleep, of waking with scratches on her palms, wounds that no one had given her. The beta's smirk slowly died as he listened. His chest tightened with something he couldn't name. When she finished, silence lay between them like a blade. At last, he spoke. "Do you know how the queen died?" Her eyes widened. "No. Neither does anyone else," he said grimly. "They say it was childbirth. They say she never saw her son's face. But I remember that night. The halls shook with cries no one explained. The king forbade talk of it. Guards disappeared. Servants vanished. All anyone was told was that she was gone, and that the boy lived." Her breath caught. "You think—" "I don't think." He cut her off, voice hard. "But your dreams? They sound like memories someone buried alive. And the queen's eyes." His voice faltered. "I've seen them too. In portraits. In you." The Omega shivered. The weight of his words pressed against the fragile threads of her sanity. Could dreams be memories? Could the glow in her eyes be more than defiance? Before either could say more, a voice broke the night. "Beta." They turned. At the top of the slope, the king stood, his frame a shadow against the torches, his presence heavy enough to silence even the crickets, his eyes fixed on his son's second in command, not the girl. "Walk with me." The beta obeyed. He glanced once at the Omega, his grin gone, his expression unreadable. Then he followed the king into the shadows of the walls. The corridors were narrow and cold, torches guttering low. The king walked in silence until they reached a chamber where no ears dared linger. He turned then, his face carved in iron, his eyes black with command. "She cannot remain." The beta stiffened. "My prince." "Not the prince. Me." The king's voice cracked like a whip. That girl is a danger. I saw it. You saw it. The pack saw it. And whispers grow faster than loyalty. She is no accident. She is a threat. The beta swallowed. What do you want done? The king leaned closer, his breath harsh, his words a decree no man could ignore. End her. Quietly. Tonight. The king's command clung to the beta long after he left the chamber, heavy as iron around his throat. End her. Quietly. Tonight. The words echoed with every step. He had taken orders before, hundreds of them. Kill, burn, silence. He had never hesitated. Obedience was survival, and survival was all he had ever known. But this time, the order sank into his bones differently. The Omega's dreams replayed in his mind. The pale woman writhing in blood, the whispered name, the golden eyes. He had heard her voice tremble, had seen her fists tighten around the cracked spear until her palms bled. He had felt the tremor of something buried too deep to be coincidence. For the first time, he wondered if loyalty to a throne could mean treachery to truth. That night, he came for her. The Omega was in the lower yard, scrubbing bloodstains from the stones where the pack had trained earlier. The task had been given to her on purpose. It always was. The dirtiest, harshest work. Her fingers were raw, her back bent, her mind lost in exhaustion. When the beta appeared in the torchlight, she stiffened, waiting for another sneer, another cruel command. Instead, he said, "Walk with me." She looked up sharply, wary. Why? Because if you don't, this courtyard will be your grave. The fear in his tone was not the kind she was used to. It wasn't mockery. It was warning. Against her better judgment, she rose. He didn't bind her wrists, didn't shove her forward. He simply turned toward the gate, and she followed. They slipped through the walls, the night wrapping them in silence. The forest stretched dark and endless, pines whispering in the wind, branches creaking like old bones. The moon hung heavy, bleeding silver over the earth. She finally asked, "Why here?" The beta didn't answer right away. He led her deeper, boots crunching over roots and fallen leaves, until the torchlight of the fortress was swallowed by black. Only then did he stop. He drew his dagger, not with the flourish of cruelty, but with the hesitation of a man breaking his own spine. The Omega froze, chest tight. She had known this moment would come. Every humiliation, every whisper, every flicker of fear in the king's eyes. It had always pointed here. Death in the dark, far from ears that might listen. But the beta's hand trembled. He held the blade out, inches from her chest, and still he couldn't drive it home. His jaw clenched, his breath ragged. "You should already be dead," he said. "Then do it," she whispered, voice steady despite the pounding in her veins. "You've mocked me enough. End it." His eyes burned into hers. "Do you even know what you are?" She swallowed. "I am nothing." "No," he growled, lowering the blade an inch. "Nothing does not haunt the king. Nothing does not glow like the queen's blood. Nothing does not crawl into my head and leave me awake at night." He stepped back, sheathing the dagger with a violent motion. "You're not nothing, and that's why he wants you gone." Her breath caught. "The king?" He nodded. His order was clear. "Kill you. Quietly. Erase the whispers before they become fire." Her knees weakened, but she didn't fall. "Then why didn't you?" The beta looked away, his hands flexing. "Because I can't. Because if your dreams are true, if that light in your eyes is what I think it is, then killing you isn't loyalty. It's treason to something greater than him, greater than any of us." She stared at him, confusion and fear twisting in her gut. "What am I?" His mouth tightened. "Run. That's all you need to know now. Get as far from these walls as you can. If you stay, the king will find a way. And next time it won't be me with the blade. It'll be someone who doesn't hesitate." Her voice broke. "Where would I go?" The pack hates me. The villages spit on me. There's no place left. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper, then disappear into the wild. Wolves survive there. If you are who I think you are, the wild will not kill you. It will crown you. Her chest heaved. She wanted to ask more, but the urgency in his eyes silenced her. He turned, motioning toward the trees. Go, before I change my mind. She hesitated, torn between fear and the strange flicker of trust she had never felt toward him before. Finally, she nodded, stepping back into the shadows of the forest. But before she could vanish, a voice cut the night. Going somewhere? The Omega froze. The Beta cursed under his breath. From the trees, the prince stepped forward, silver sword in hand, the blade catching the moonlight. His eyes burned, not with mockery but with something sharper. Suspicion honed to a razor's edge. His cloak dragged in the dirt, his jaw locked. He looked first at the Omega, then at the Beta, then at the dagger still strapped to the Beta's hip. His voice was quiet, but it cracked like thunder. Explain. Now. The prince's blade gleamed cold under the moon, its edge steady, though his grip was iron hard. He stood before them both, the forest wind tugging his cloak, eyes shifting between his Beta and the Omega. The silence stretched, broken only by the groan of trees and the faint call of an owl somewhere far away. Explain, he repeated, voice lower now, more dangerous. The Beta raised both hands slightly, palms open, as if warding off the weight of the command. My prince, don't lie. The prince's voice snapped like a whip. I saw you lead her here, alone, armed. I should gut you where you stand for treachery. The Omega's chest tightened. She could feel the Beta's hesitation like a storm pressing down, see the way sweat broke along his temple. He had faced armies without flinching, yet now he faltered. I was ordered, the Beta said at last. His voice was steady, but his jaw trembled with rage. By the king. The prince's sword tilted just slightly, though his eyes narrowed. The king? The Beta nodded once. He commanded me to end her. Quietly. Tonight. The Omega staggered back, her breath catching, the words slicing through her chest sharper than any blade. Her voice came out hoarse. To kill me? The prince's silence was louder than confirmation. He turned his sword now, pointing it toward her instead of his Beta. His gaze locked on her, fierce and unyielding. Why? What are you? I don't know, she whispered, shaking her head. I swear it. I'm no one. The prince stepped forward, blade rising. The Beta lunged, putting himself between them, his hands raised. Stop! The Omega stumbled in the sudden tension, tripping against a root. Her arm scraped against the jagged edge of a fallen branch. She hissed in pain as blood welled, hot and quick, running down her forearm. The prince froze. The Beta's eyes widened, for where her blood touched her skin, it did not drip like any others. The crimson parted, curling back as if pushed aside, revealing a faint symbol beneath the flesh, an ancient sigil etched into her very being. It glowed dimly at first, then burned with a faint golden shimmer, a mark of bloodline, a seal. The forest seemed to bow under the weight of it. The trees groaned, the wind stilled, and the air itself grew heavy. The prince lowered his blade an inch, his eyes locked on the mark. He knew it. He had seen it before, engraved into the queen's signet ring, painted faintly into the background of her portrait, whispered of in hushed tones by those old enough to remember. The seal of her line, the bloodline that had once ruled before his father. The Omega clutched her arm, horrified, her breath ragged. What is happening to me? The Beta's voice cracked, awe breaking through his usual steadiness. The queen's seal. Gods, it's real. The prince's expression hardened. His sword wavered, but not from uncertainty. From recognition. From a truth he had never been meant to face. She's not nothing, the Beta said, turning to him, voice urgent. She's your blood. The prince's throat tightened, his eyes never leaving the shimmering sigil. He saw his mother's painted gaze reflected in the Omega's terrified eyes, saw her deathbed whispers, the mystery he had never been allowed to question, saw the truth clawing its way out of the grave where it had been buried. No, the prince muttered, almost to himself, but his voice trembled. The Omega's gaze searched his, desperate. What am I? The prince finally lowered his sword, though his eyes burned with fury and fear both. His jaw clenched, and his words fell heavy into the silence. You are hers. The Omega's heart hammered. She didn't understand, not fully, but she saw the way his face broke, the way his voice cracked against the stone of denial. The prince staggered a step back, sword still in hand but his certainty collapsing. The mark on her arm had not faded by dawn. Even when the bleeding stopped, even when her skin trembled under the rough cloth she pressed against it, the faint shimmer of gold lingered beneath the surface, pulsing like a secret heartbeat. The beta tried to cover it, wrapping her wrist in torn fabric, but it was too late. The prince had seen it, and so had the trees, the night, the silence that carried whispers faster than words. By the time they returned to the fortress, torches burned high in the courtyard, and the king was waiting. He stood before the gathered pack, his frame a tower of iron and age. His cloak fell heavy to the ground, the crown of wolf bone casting shadows across his lined face. His gaze cut first to his son, then to the beta, then finally to the Omega. When his eyes landed on her, they hardened, not with curiosity, not even with anger, but with a recognition that carried venom. Bring her forward, he commanded. Guards seized her, though she did not resist. Her knees scraped stone as she was dragged into the center of the crowd once more. She lifted her head, her breathing quick, and for the first time she saw the pack not with scorn, but with fear in their eyes. Fear of her, fear of what she carried. The king's voice carried like thunder. This girl has committed the greatest treason. The crowd muttered, restless. He raised a hand, silencing them. She dares to wear the blood of my queen. She dares to claim her mark. His eyes flicked to the rag tied around her wrist. But blood lies. Blood deceives. She is no heir. She is a fraud, a trick born of weakness and dirt. The beta shifted at his side, fists clenched, but he said nothing. The prince stood rigid, face unreadable, though his hands twitched as if they longed for the hilt of his sword. His gaze flicked once to the Omega's bound wrists, then away, as though looking too long would brand him as well. The king continued, his voice rising. From this moment forward, she is no longer merely an outcast. She is a danger to the throne, a stain on the pack's honor, and the punishment for treason is death. The crowd gasped, the word rippling through them like fire. Death. The Omega's chest tightened. She wanted to speak, to cry out, but her voice would not come. Yet, the king said, lowering his tone, death will not come quickly. She will rot until the full moon, and then her blood will feed the soil. Her mark will fade, her name will vanish, as it should have from the beginning. The guards dragged her away, their grip unyielding. She stumbled as they pulled her down stone corridors past iron gates into the belly of the fortress where the air smelled of damp and rot. Her cell was nothing more than a pit of stone and shadow, straw scattered thin across the floor. The door slammed shut behind her, the lock snapping like a curse. Alone, she pressed her back to the wall, drawing her knees to her chest. Her wrists throbbed where the bindings had cut deep, her arm burned with the mark she still didn't understand. And in her chest anger began to kindle, anger at their laughter, their cruelty, their fear. Outside her cell, whispers spread through the fortress like wild smoke. Servants carried them to kitchens. Guards murmured them over dice. Even the young ones who had never known the queen repeated them in hushed voices. The forgotten heir, the queen's child hidden all these years. The king has lied. By nightfall, the fortress was split, not by proof but by rumor. and rumor was deadlier than truth. In the cell, sleep came unwillingly, dragging her down into darkness. The dream returned. The woman lay pale and broken, her body drenched in sweat and blood. Her hand stretched weakly into the void, her voice a whisper, fragile but clear. "Daughter." The Omega's breath hitched even in sleep. The word pierced her like a blade, sharp and undeniable. She reached for the woman, but her fingers passed through her like smoke. The woman's eyes glowed faint gold, the same glow she now carried in her own veins. "Daughter," the voice repeated, softer now, as if slipping into silence. The Omega woke with a strangled gasp, tears she hadn't realized she carried streaking her cheeks. Her palms were raw again, scratched as though she had clawed her own skin in sleep. The mark on her wrist pulsed brighter in the moonlight slanting through the bars. She pressed her forehead to the cold stone wall, her body shaking. She wasn't nothing. She never had been. And now, no matter what they called her, no matter how deep they buried her, the truth would not stay silent. The fortress feasted that night, but the laughter at the banquet tables was thin, brittle, and strained. Cups clinked against wood, meat was torn from bone, yet beneath it all there was an undercurrent too heavy to ignore. Whispers slithered through the hall like snakes. The girl glowed. The queen's eyes returned. The king fears her. The prince sat at the long table, his plate untouched, his ears full of murmurs that never reached his father's throne. The king drank heavily, goblet after goblet of dark wine, his eyes sharp and unyielding as they swept the hall. He said nothing of the Omega, though every soul present thought of her. The prince watched him closely, noting the faint tremor in his father's hand, the tightness in his jaw. Fear had found the king, though he hid it beneath iron and wine. When the feast ended and the hall emptied, the prince did not return to his chambers. He followed his father into the dark corridor of the ancestral wing, boots echoing faintly against cold stone. The torches sputtered low, shadows curling across the carved faces of wolves immortalized in the walls. At the far end stood the queen's portrait, her golden eyes catching the flicker of flame. The king stopped there as if compelled, his back to his son. "Father," the prince said. His voice was even, but there was weight in it. "What is she?" The king did not turn. "She is nothing." The prince's fists tightened. Nothing does not carry the queen's mark. The king's shoulders tensed. "You saw what I wanted you to see, a trick of light, a lie." "Enough." The prince's voice cracked like steel. He stepped closer, his chest tight, anger clawing past his restraint. "I saw it. I see her eyes, her blood, her mark, and I see you, silent, afraid. Tell me the truth." For a long moment the king said nothing. His breath rasped, harsh and heavy, filling the silence of the hall. At last he turned. His face was shadowed, but his eyes gleamed dark. "The queen bore a child before me." The words landed like stones. The prince's jaw locked. "Before you?" The king nodded slowly, grimly. "Before I claimed her, before she wore my crown. She bore the shame of another's seed. It was a disgrace to the line. If the pack had known, it would have shattered her, shattered us both. So we hid it. We buried it. We erased it." The prince felt his chest tighten. His mother who had been spoken of as pure, untouchable, the perfect queen, had carried another child, a firstborn. "Where?" His voice was low, trembling with fury. Where was this child hidden? The king's lips pressed into a hard line. Far from the throne, far from any eye that might connect her, and when the queen died giving you life, I sealed the secret. I told the world she had borne only one. You. You were all that mattered. The prince stepped back, the floor seeming to tilt beneath his boots. His breath came sharp, his thoughts clashing like blades. "Then the girl?" "She is proof," the king cut in, his voice sharp as a dagger. "Proof of betrayal, proof of weakness, proof that the throne was never as strong as they believed. She must be destroyed, or everything we have built crumbles. The prince's voice cracked, louder now. You built the throne on lies. The king's eyes flashed. I built the throne on survival. There is no difference. The prince turned away, his hands trembling at his sides. His mind reeled with images. The queen's painted gaze, the Omega's defiant stare, the golden shimmer in both. His entire life, every command he had obeyed, every cruelty he had been told was strength. All of it rested on a false foundation. The king stepped closer, his voice low, insidious. You are the heir, the only heir. Do not let this phantom take what is yours. Forget her. Let her rot. That is the order of things. The prince closed his eyes, breath shuddering. The order of things. He had repeated that phrase countless times while crushing Omegas, while silencing voices, while mocking the weak. But now it tasted like ash in his mouth. When he opened his eyes, he no longer looked at his father with obedience. He looked at him with something colder, sharper. You taught me to mock the weak, he said softly, but you are the weakest of all. The king's face hardened, but his son did not stay to see the fury that followed. He turned, cloak cutting through the air, leaving the hall behind. His steps echoed with a new weight, each one carrying him further from certainty and deeper into the fracture of truth. The cell was colder that night, though no wind touched its walls. The Omega sat against the damp stone, knees drawn tight to her chest, her wrists raw where ropes had bitten deep. The straw beneath her clung with the stink of rot and mold, but her mind was too heavy to notice. Her dreams had become chains she couldn't escape. Each time her eyes closed, the woman appeared. The pale face, the blood-soaked sheets, the dying hands reaching into nothing. But this night, the dream shifted. The woman was clearer now. Not just a shape, not just a mother writhing in agony. Her face bore lines of nobility, her hair spilling loose across her shoulders, her golden eyes burning even as death pressed against her lips. The Omega's breath caught when the woman turned toward her, as though she could finally see her. Daughter. The word came again, no longer a whisper lost in the dark, but a voice trembling with both sorrow and strength. The Omega reached out, trembling fingers stretching through the dream's air. Who are you? The woman smiled faintly, though her face was pale with death. You know me already. You carry me. The dream trembled, shifting. The room around them burned away, and suddenly the Omega stood in a vast hall of shadows. Wolves carved from stone lined the walls, their eyes empty, their fangs bared. The queen stood at the center, clothed not in bloodied linens, but in regal robes, her golden eyes shining brighter now. The Omega's chest rose and fell in sharp breaths. Why do you haunt me? Because truth cannot be silenced, the queen's spirit said. Her voice echoed, filling the chamber as though the walls themselves bent to her. They buried me. They buried you. But blood rises, always. Tears stung the Omega's eyes. They call me a fraud, a traitor. They hate me. The queen stepped closer, her hand lifting though it did not touch. Her presence was warmth, and yet it pressed against the Omega's bones like fire. They fear you. Do you not see it? The king, your brother, even the Beta, they do not laugh because you are nothing. They laugh because you are everything they cannot control. The Omega shook her head. I don't want a throne. I never asked for this. The queen's expression hardened. You were never meant to sit a throne. The words cut deep. The Omega blinked. Then what am I meant for? The queen's spirit leaned in, her eyes burning gold. Not to rule. To ruin. The shadows around them shuddered. The carved wolves seemed to shift, their eyes glowing faintly, their stone bodies trembling as if alive. The Omega's heart pounded. I don't understand, she whispered. You were born to end what I could not, the queen said. Her voice grew colder, sharper, carrying the weight of command. My death was not the end. It was the beginning. They silenced me, but they could not silence my blood. You are my vengeance, my truth, my weapon. The Omega's throat tightened. The words echoed in her chest, sinking deep into the marrow of her bones. She thought of the courtyard, the mockery, the laughter. She thought of the king's eyes when they saw her mark. She thought of her brother's sword, raised against her only to falter. Her fear cracked, and beneath it something harder began to grow. Resolve. The queen's eyes blazed. Rise, and end what my death began. The Omega gasped awake in her cell, heart hammering, sweat clinging to her skin. Her palms burned raw again, her nails bloodied from clawing the stone floor in her sleep. She looked down, and the golden shimmer of the mark on her arm pulsed brighter, steady, alive. For the first time, she did not weep. For the first time, her body did not tremble. She pressed her palm to the mark, whispering through gritted teeth, "I am not nothing." The cell remained silent, but inside her, the queen's command echoed like a heartbeat. The fortress felt different in the days that followed the king's decree. Silence grew thick in its corridors, as though even the stone walls held their breath. The pack went about their duties, hunting, training, guarding, but their voices carried unease instead of pride. Whispers crawled beneath every door. The Omega glowed. The queen's eyes live again. The king fears her. The prince heard them all. He walked the halls as he always had, his cloak cutting through torchlight, his presence commanding obedience. Yet behind the bows and lowered gazes, he could feel it. The questions, the doubt, the way loyalty was starting to bend like a brittle branch under too much weight. And every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, defiant in the courtyard, trembling in the forest, blood spilling over the sigil that glowed like fire beneath her skin. His mother's mark. It gnawed at him. In the training yard, he struck down warriors one after another, blade clashing until his arms burned, but no amount of steel could silence the thought. She is yours. She is hers. She is proof that everything he told you was a lie. The beta found him there, leaning against the rail with his usual grin, though it didn't reach his eyes. He watched the prince drive his sword into the earth, chest heaving, sweat dripping into the dust. "You'll break steel before you break your own head," the beta said. The prince glared at him but said nothing. The beta stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You've been different since the forest, since her blood." The prince's jaw tightened. "She is a threat." The beta smirked faintly. "To him, yes. To you?" His grin faded. "No, she's your mirror, whether you want to admit it or not." The prince turned sharply. "Don't speak as if you know. I know more than you think." The beta's voice was steady now, his eyes serious. "I know the king ordered me to kill her. I know I couldn't. I know that when you looked at her mark, you didn't see an enemy. You saw your mother." The words hit hard. The prince looked away, fists curling. "If what you say is true, then everything he built was built on lies," the beta finished. Silence pressed between them. The prince's chest rose and fell with rage, with confusion, with the weight of loyalty turned into chains. "He is my father, and she is your sister," the beta said firmly. "Blood against blood, so choose." The prince's throat tightened. "You ask me to betray him?" The beta stepped closer, his eyes burning now. "No, I ask you to honor her. Honor the queen. Honor truth." He jabbed a finger into the prince's chest. "Do you even remember what honor is? Or have you only ever known obedience?" The words cut sharper than any blade. The prince shoved past him, striding through the fortress, his mind a storm. He saw the servants' wary eyes, the guards' murmured oaths, the hollow fear in the elders' silence. The king's shadow hung over them all like a curse, and for the first time, the prince wondered if it had always been that way. His steps carried him to the lower halls, where the air grew colder, thicker, until the iron-barred cells came into view. Guards nodded stiffly as he passed, but none dared stop him. They felt the storm in his stride. He stopped before her cell. The Omega sat in the corner, her knees drawn to her chest, her golden mark faintly pulsing in the moonlight that spilled through the narrow grate above. She looked up when he appeared, her eyes wary but unbroken. For a long moment, he said nothing. He only stared, torn between everything he had been taught and everything he now knew. The keys in his hand were cold, heavy, pressing into his palm like judgment itself. His grip tightened, and then, without a word, he slid one into the lock. The sound of the mechanism turning was louder than thunder in the silence of the dungeon. The iron door groaned as the lock slid back. The Omega lifted her head, eyes narrowing in disbelief. She had expected more taunts, more threats, never freedom. The prince stood framed in torchlight, shadows cutting sharp across his face. He looked as though he carried a weight too heavy even for him. "Why?" she whispered, her voice dry from silence. The prince hesitated, hand still on the key. His jaw worked as if he were chewing on words he could not swallow. Finally, his voice came low, nearly a growl. "Because I can no longer tell myself you are nothing." The Omega rose slowly, wariness etched into every movement. Her wrists were swollen from rope burns, her knees stiff from stone, but her spirit did not bow. She stepped closer to the bars, the golden shimmer of her bloodline faint under her skin. He pushed the door open. The sound of metal on metal rang like a judgment. Before she could move, the Beta appeared in the shadows of the hall. His grin was faint, but his eyes were sharp. "I see you finally listened to the voice in your head," he said. The prince's glare cut at him, but he didn't deny it. "You knew I would." The Beta shrugged. "Truth has teeth. Once it bites, it doesn't let go." He stepped forward, pulling a cloak from his shoulder and throwing it around the Omega's thin frame. "Come. The walls are whispering already. We have little time before the king sends ears to follow them." They moved quickly, boots muffled against stone, the torchlight behind them fading into silence. The dungeon breathed with damp rot, the iron doors watching their passage like blind eyes. When they emerged into the outer corridors, the fortress seemed to stir. The air felt different, tense, alive, as if the stone itself knew betrayal was unfolding within it. They slipped through servants' passages, past kitchens where tired hands stirred pots, past the armory where blades hung silent in their sheaths. Every step brought them closer to the gate, but also closer to danger. At the outer yard, the moon washed the stone in pale silver. The Omega stumbled once, nearly falling, but the Beta caught her arm, steadying her. He looked down at her with something like grim respect. "You're stronger than you know. Don't waste it." Before she could answer, horns split the night. The sound was long and mournful, echoing across the walls, carried on the wind like a death knell. Guards shouted in the distance, doors slammed open, boots thundered against stone. The king knew. The prince cursed under his breath, drawing his blade. "We're too late." From the high walls, hunters poured forth, wolves in their second skin, eyes gleaming red, their snarls tearing through the night. They fanned out across the courtyard, forming a circle of teeth and steel, their shadows rippling in the moonlight. The king appeared on the balcony above, his cloak heavy, his face twisted into iron fury. His voice carried like thunder, echoing across the yard. "My son, my Beta, my shame." His words dripped with venom. He pointed down at the Omega, his eyes burning into her. "That thing is no heir. She is a curse born of betrayal, and curses are not freed. They are bound, or they are broken." The Omega's heart pounded as the circle of hunters closed in. The prince raised his sword, the Beta drew his dagger, but the king's words drowned out the clatter of steel. "You think you've saved her," the king bellowed, "but you have doomed her instead. For I marked her at birth as I marked all who would threaten the throne. If she dares to claim her wolf, her body will betray her. Her bones will splinter, her flesh will tear apart, and she will die screaming. That is my curse." The words struck like a blow. The Omega staggered, clutching her chest as though the curse itself coiled there, waiting. Her knees buckled, but she stayed standing, her eyes lifting to the king with fury. The prince's grip tightened on his sword, his knuckles white. The beta's jaw clenched, his eyes flicking between her and the hunters. The king spread his arms wide, voice booming, final. Try if you dare. Claim your wolf and watch your death unfold. The hunters closed in, their eyes red with the king's command, their bodies half-shifted, claws scraping stone as they circled tighter. The courtyard shuddered with the weight of their growls, each sound a warning, each step an echo of violence. Torches flickered along the walls, throwing jagged light across steel and teeth. The Omega's chest heaved, her back pressed against the cold wall, the circle tightening before her. The king's voice still thundered in her ears. If she dares to claim her wolf, her body will splinter, her flesh will tear apart, and she will die screaming. The beta stood at her side, dagger drawn, his grin sharpened into something feral. They'll tear us apart, he muttered, almost to himself. Yet his eyes gleamed, because even in the face of death, he had chosen where to stand. The prince took position before them both, sword raised high. His face was pale beneath the moonlight, but his stance was unyielding, his presence radiating a command even the hunters hesitated to challenge. He would defend her, though his father's voice roared above them all. Strike her down, the king bellowed. Tear the lie from her flesh. The hunters lunged. Claws slashed through the air, teeth bared, steel clashed. The prince met the first with a downward strike, his blade splitting a wolf's shoulder, hot blood splattering the stone. The beta ducked under another, driving his dagger up into the soft belly of a snarling beast. The Omega stumbled backward, eyes wide as chaos erupted before her, and then something inside her broke loose. A pressure she had felt for nights, for weeks, pressed harder against her chest, crawling up her throat, burning behind her eyes. Her knees buckled. She clutched at her ribs, gasping as though her body were caught between fire and ice. The mark on her arm blazed brighter than ever, golden light pouring through her skin like molten metal. No, the king roared from the balcony, his voice shattering against the night. Do not call it, you'll rip yourself apart. The Omega dropped to her knees. Pain tore through her body, savage and merciless. Her bones cracked, as if splitting under unseen hammers. Her spine arched, her skin seared with fire, her scream rising so raw and sharp it silenced even the hunters mid-lunge. She collapsed to her hands, clawing the stone as though to anchor herself against the storm inside. The beta's eyes widened. She's... The prince's sword faltered in his grip. He wanted to stop it, to drag her back, to shield her from whatever curse his father had bound into her blood. But the light only grew stronger. The courtyard lit as if a second moon had risen. Gold poured from her wounds, her eyes, her very veins. Her body trembled, racked with agony. But she did not die. She did not splinter. She changed. Her wolf burst forth, but not like the others. Not silver. Not black. Not gray. She emerged in gold, her fur shimmering as though each strand was spun from sunlight itself, her eyes burning with the same glow that once marked the queen's gaze. She stood taller, stronger, her frame fierce but elegant, radiating an aura that made even the hunters stumble back in terror. The pack had seen wolves before, but never this, never a wolf that bore the light of a bloodline thought buried. From the balcony, the king's face twisted into horror. His curse had failed. The Omega, no longer small, no longer powerless, threw back her head and howled. The sound tore through the fortress, shaking every stone, rattling every chain, splitting the night sky like thunder. The hunters lowered their ears, whining, their bodies shrinking from her presence. Even the prince and the beta, hardened by war and cruelty, felt their knees tremble. And then the earth answered. The courtyard floor shivered, cracks running through the stone as though the ground itself recognized her. Torches fell from the walls, clattering in showers of sparks. From the shadows, a cold wind rose, carrying with it the unmistakable voice that had haunted her dreams. The Queen's spirit. Her form shimmered in the air, half light, half shadow, her golden eyes gleaming with both sorrow and fire. Her voice filled the night, echoing not only in ears but in bones, in blood. "You carry me," she said, "and I rise with you." The prince staggered back, his sword dropping slightly, his heart hammering at the sight of his mother's spirit. The beta's grin finally faltered, awe flickering across his sharp features. The hunters whimpered, claws scraping stone as they backed away. The king's roar broke across the night. "No! This is blasphemy! She should not exist!" But the ground trembled harder, the queen's form growing clearer, her gaze burning into her daughter's wolf. "You are not here to serve," the spirit intoned, her voice splitting the air like a command. "You are not here to kneel. You are here to finish what I began." The Omega's golden wolf stood tall beneath her mother's light, her chest heaving, her body blazing with power. The courtyard still trembled beneath the queen's voice, her spectral form lingering in golden light above the pack. The hunters dared not advance, their ears pinned, their bodies shivering under the weight of the Omega's howl and the spirit's command. For a heartbeat, it felt as if time itself bent to her, the forgotten daughter, the ruined secret, now risen in wolfskin of gold. But the king would not bend. From his balcony, he raised his arms, his cloak flaring like black wings, his voice breaking the silence with thunder. "She is no heir," he bellowed. "She is no savior. She is an abomination, a curse upon our blood, upon our throne. Look at her." He pointed to the golden wolf, his face twisted with both fear and fury. "Does that look like us? Does that look like your kind? She is not wolf. She is poison-wearing fur." The pack below stirred, torn between awe and terror. Some snarled, others whimpered, but the king pressed harder, his voice a lash across their doubt. "She is the stain of betrayal. The queen was weak, and her weakness lives in this girl. If she rises, everything we have built will fall. The fortress, the order, the pack itself will burn." The hunters stiffened, their eyes flicking between the king and the golden wolf. For many, loyalty was easier than truth. The prince stepped forward, his sword still drawn, his chest heaving with anger. His voice cut through the night, sharp and unyielding. "No, she is not poison, she is blood. She is your blood, father, and you have lied to us all." A gasp rippled through the gathered wolves. The beta moved to his prince's side, his dagger flashing in the torchlight, his smirk sharpened into a challenge. "You call her an abomination?" the beta barked. "Then I'll gladly stand with her. Better curse truth than a throne of lies." The king's face darkened, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Traitors," he hissed. "Both of you." And then he raised his hand, signaling. The fortress gates burst open, and from them poured the king's loyalists, dozens of wolves, steel gleaming, eyes red with bloodlust. The courtyard erupted in chaos. The prince met the first wave head-on, his blade carving arcs of silver through flesh and fur. Blood sprayed, hot and sharp, staining the stones. The beta fought at his side, quick and ruthless, his dagger darting like a viper, his laughter wild even as enemies closed from all sides. The Omega leapt into the fray, her golden wolf tearing through hunters with strength none had ever seen. Claws shredded armor, jaws snapped bone. Her light burned in the dark, blinding, holy, and terrible all at once. Every howl she loosed shattered courage, driving cracks into the pack's resolve. But still, they came. The courtyard filled with screams, with the clash of steel, with the wet crunch of bone. The stones drank blood until they gleamed black under the moon. Wolves turned on wolves, brother against brother, loyalty splintering into carnage. The fortress itself seemed to groan under the weight of the war. The king watched from above, his eyes burning with fury but not fear. He did not flinch when the first of his men fell, or when the golden wolf split a path through his forces. He only raised his arms higher, his voice cutting above the chaos. "You think this war will end me? You think her light can destroy what I have built?" The prince, drenched in blood, snarled up at him. "Your lies will bury you." The king's lips curled into something close to a smile. "Then let me show you the truth of my throne." He raised both hands, slicing them open with his own blade. Blood poured, dripping down his wrists, staining the balcony stone. He pressed his palms to the air, and ancient words spilled from his mouth in a tongue older than the pack itself. The sound scraped bone, sharp and heavy, vibrating in the marrow of every wolf who heard it. The battle slowed. The loyalists froze. Even the traitors staggered, clutching their chests. The air thickened, pulling taut like a rope around every throat. The prince gasped, his sword faltering. The beta dropped to one knee, teeth clenched. The Omega's golden form shuddered, her glow flickering. The king's voice thundered, echoing with power not his own. "By oath of blood, by crown of wolf, by throne of bone, I bind you all. Every alpha, every heir, every spark of my blood answers to me." The pack collapsed, howling in agony as the curse wove through them. Chains unseen wrapped around their souls, dragging them to their knees. The courtyard shook, wolves falling one by one, their bodies trembling against the weight of his command. The king's eyes glowed red, his smile vicious. "This is my throne's gift," he roared. "The blood oath that binds every alpha born from this line. She may glow, she may rise, but she will kneel, as you all kneel to me." The prince struggled against the invisible weight crushing his chest. The beta clawed at the stones, growling curses. The Omega staggered, her golden light dimming, her body trembling under the chains of her blood. Above them all, the king stood untouched, his voice triumphant, his final weapon revealed. The blood oath bound the courtyard in chains of agony. Wolves writhed on the ground, their bodies trembling as if their very marrow was being split. The prince pressed his sword into the earth, gasping as invisible cords dragged him low. The beta clawed at the stones, his laughter silenced at last by the weight crushing his chest. Even the golden wolf faltered, her light flickering as if smothered by shadow. Above them, the king stood tall on his balcony, arms outstretched, blood dripping freely from his palms. His eyes glowed with crimson fire as his voice thundered across the fortress. "You see now?" he roared. "You thought to break me with lies and shadows, but you are mine. Every alpha born of this line bends to my blood. She may carry the queen's mark, but even that light kneels to me." The Omega's body trembled. The curse tore at her bones, forcing her golden form down until her knees scraped the stone. Her head bowed, her light dimmed, her howl caught in her throat. She could feel the chains digging deeper, wrapping tighter, threatening to suffocate the wolf she had barely claimed. And then, beneath the pain, she heard it, her mother's voice. "You are not here to kneel." The queen's spirit flared within her chest, louder than the king's command, burning hotter than his curse. Her mother's eyes blazed in her mind, fierce and unyielding. "You are not here to serve. You are here to end." The Omega's body shuddered. Her claws scraped stone, golden sparks igniting beneath them. She lifted her head, her eyes glowing brighter, defying the red chains clawing into her blood. Her voice tore from her throat in a growl that grew into a roar, a sound that split the night and silenced even the hunter's howls. The king staggered, his binding chant faltering. "No," he hissed, forcing the words again. "You cannot resist me." But the Omega did not fight the chains. She reached deeper past them to the root of their power. The throne. Her golden eyes fixed on the high balcony where it stood, the carved seat of bone and iron, the symbol of his reign, the anchor of the oath. She could feel it pulsing, alive with the blood of every alpha bound before her, the cage that kept them all kneeling. Her body surged forward, claws tearing into stone as she leapt. She tore through wolves that dared to bar her path, their bodies scattering like leaves in fire. She bounded up the stairs, her golden light burning hotter with every step. The beta, half choking on the curse, forced himself upright, laughing through blood. "Break it, girl. Burn it all." The prince struggled to rise, his body trembling, his voice hoarse. Do it! The king tried to bar her path, his hands blazing with crimson power. I am the throne, he shouted. I am the blood! The Omega roared, her golden light colliding with his crimson fire. The ground quaked, walls splintered, the fortress shook as if the earth itself rebelled. She hurled herself not at him, but at the throne. Her claws sank into its carved bones, her jaws clamped down. And with a howl that split heaven and earth, she shattered it. The throne cracked, then crumbled, bone and iron splintering into shards that rained across the hall. The blood oath screamed, ripping itself apart. Chains snapped. Wolves gasped as the crushing weight vanished from their chests. The king stumbled back, eyes wide with horror. Without the throne, his power collapsed. His body shook, his blood pouring from wounds that were not visible, his roar breaking into a ragged cry. He fell, cloak billowing, crown slipping from his head as he crashed onto the stones below. Silence fell. The pack lay scattered across the courtyard, their eyes wide, their bodies trembling. The prince stood on shaking legs, his sword falling from his hand as he stared at the ruin. The beta staggered, his grin returning, bloody and weak, but alive. The Omega stood above them all, her golden wolf burning in the night. The queen's voice echoed one last time within her. It is done. The prince looked up at her, tears streaking his face. Slowly, brokenly, he fell to his knees, not from chains, but from truth. Sister, he whispered, voice cracked. Forgive me. The golden wolf looked down at him. Her eyes burned, not with hatred, not with mercy, but with something harder. She said nothing. She did not bow. The pack waited, breathless, for her to claim what was hers, to step into the void left by the throne, to rule. But she did not. Instead, she turned. She leapt from the balcony, her paws striking the earth with thunder, her golden glow streaking into the night. She ran into the wild, vanishing into trees and shadows, her light burning long after she disappeared. The pack was left broken, leaderless. The king fallen, the prince bowed, the throne shattered, and the world held its breath, uncertain what the golden wolf would do next.